Hi YouTubers, here's another story from my library, read for you by Shelley, Nightdreamer Winters. Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep by PhilipKDick. Bladerunner. A merry little surge of electricity, piped by automatic alarm from the mood organ beside his bed, awakened Rick Deckard. Surprised. It always surprised him to find himself awake without prior notice. He rose from the bed, stood up in his multicoloured pyjamas and stretched. Now in her bed his wife Iran opened her grey, unmerry eyes, blinked, then groaned and shut her eyes again. "You set your pen field too weak," he said to her. "I'll reset it and you'll be awake, and keep your hand off my settings." Her voice held bitter sharpness. "I don't want to be awake." He seated himself beside her, bent over her, and explained softly, "If you set the surge up high enough, you'll be glad you're awake. That's the whole point. At setting C, it overcomes the threshold barring consciousness, as it does for me." Friendly, because he felt well disposed towards the world. His setting had been at D. He patted her bare, pale shoulder. "Get your crude cop's hand away," Iran said. "I'm not a cop." He felt irritable now, although he hadn't dialed for it. "You're worse," his wife said, her eyes still shut. "You're a murderer hired by the cops." "I've never killed a human being in my life." His irritability had risen now, and had become outright hostility. Iran said, "Just those poor Andys." "I notice you've never had any hesitation as to spending the bounty money I bring home on whatever momentarily attracts your attention." He rose, strode to the console of his mood organ. "Instead of saving," he said, "so we could buy a real sheep to replace that fake electric one upstairs. A mere electric animal, and me earning all that I've worked my way up to through the years." At his console he hesitated between dialing for a thalamic suppressant which would abolish his mood of rage, or a thalamic stimulant which would make him irked enough to win the argument. "If you dial," Iran said, eyes open and watching, "for greater venom, then I'll dial the same. I'll dial the maximum, and you'll see a fight that makes every argument we've had up to now seem like nothing. Dial and see, just try me." She rose swiftly, loped to the console of her own mood organ, stood glaring at him, waiting. He sighed, defeated by her threat. "I'll dial what's on my schedule for today." Examining the schedule for the 3rd of January 1992, he saw that a business-like professional attitude was called for. "If I dial my schedule," he said warily, "will you agree to also?" He waited, canny enough not to commit himself, until his wife had agreed to follow suit. "My schedule for today lists a 6-hour self-accusatory depression," Iran said. "What? Why did you schedule that?" "It defeated the whole purpose of the mood organ. I didn't even know you could set it for that," he said gloomily. "I was sitting here one afternoon," Iran said, "and naturally I had turned on Buster Friendly and his friendly friends, and he was talking about a big news item he's about to break, And then that awful commercial came on, the one I hate. You know, the Mountebank lead cod pieces. And so for a minute I shut off the sound, and I heard the building. This building. I heard the... She gestured. Empty apartments, Rick said. Sometimes he heard them at night when he was supposed to be asleep. And yet, for this day and age, a one half-occupied Connaught building rated high in the scheme of population density. Out in what had been before the war, the suburbs, one could find buildings entirely empty. Or so he had heard. He had let the information remain second-hand. Like most people, he did not care to experience it directly. At that moment, Iran said, when I had the TV sound off, I was in a 382 mood. I had just dialed it. So although I heard the emptiness intellectually, I didn't feel it. My first reaction consisted of being grateful that we could afford a Penfield mood organ. But then I realized how unhealthy it was, sensing the absence of life, not just in this building, but everywhere, and not reacting. Do you see? I guess you don't. But that used to be considered a sign of mental illness. They call it absence of appropriate effect. So I left the TV sound off, and I sat down at my mood organ and I experimented. And I finally found a setting for despair. Her dark, pert face showed satisfaction, as if she had achieved something of worth. So I put it on my schedule for twice a month. I think that's a reasonable amount of time to feel hopeless about everything. About staying here on Earth after everybody who's smart has emigrated, don't you think? But a mood like that, Rick said, you're apt to stay in it, not dial your way out. Despair like that, about total reality, is self-perpetuating. I program an automatic resetting for 3 hours later, his wife said sleekly. A 481, awareness of the manifold possibilities open to me in the future. New hope that... I know 481, he interrupted. He had dialed out the combination many times. He relied on it greatly. Listen, he said, seating himself on his bed and taking a hold of her hands to draw her down beside him. Even with an automatic cut-off, it's dangerous to undergo a depression, any kind. Forget what you've scheduled, and I'll forget what I've scheduled. We'll dial a 104 together and both experience it. And then you stay in it while I reset mine for my usual business-like attitude. That way I'll want to hop up to the roof and check out the sheep, and then head for the office. Meanwhile, I'll know you're not sitting here brooding with no TV. He released her slim, long fingers, passed through the spacious apartment to the living room, which smelled faintly of last night's cigarettes. There he bent to turn on the TV. From the bedroom, Iran's voice came. I can't stand TV before breakfast. Dial 888, Rick said as the set warmed. The desire to watch TV no matter what's on it. I don't feel like dialing anything at all now, Iran said. Then dial 3, he said. I can't dial a setting that stimulates my cerebral cortex into wanting to dial. If I don't want to dial, I don't want to dial that most of all, because then I will want to dial, and wanting to dial is right now the most alien drive I can imagine. I just want to sit here on the bed and stare at the floor. Her voice had become sharp with overtones of bleakness as her soul congealed and she ceased to move. as the instinctive, omnipresent film of great weight, of an almost absolute inertia settled over her. He turned up the TV sound, and the voice of Buster Friendly boomed out and filled the room.
A new life awaits you in the off-world colony.
Ho ho, folks! Time now for a brief note on today's weather. The Mongoose satellite reports that fallout will be especially pronounced toward noon and will then taper off, so all you folks who'll be venturing out. Appearing beside him, her long nightgown trailing wispily, Iran shut off the TV set. Okay, I give up. I'll dial anything you want me to be. Ecstatic sexual bliss. I feel so bad I'll even endure that. What the hell? What difference does it make? I'll dial for both of us, Rick said, and led her back into the bedroom. There, at her console, he dialed 594. Pleased acknowledgement of husband's superior wisdom in all matters. On his own console, he dialed for a creative and fresh attitude toward his job, although this he hardly needed. Such was his habitual innate approach without recourse to Penfield artificial brain stimulation.